Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak podcast, available every morning on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. It's Wednesday, the 19th of March, here in London. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Coming up today, differing accounts emerge of the Trump-Putin call as the Russian leader refuses to back a 30-day ceasefire in Ukraine.
Morgan Stanley plans to cut around 2,000 jobs to keep a lid on costs.
Plus, has Paris peaked? We look at why global banks have put their hiring plans in the French capital on hold.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Russia's Vladimir Putin has refused President Trump's request for a 30-day Ukraine ceasefire during a phone call on ending the conflict, as the two sides offered seemingly conflicting accounts of their discussion. The Kremlin says Putin agreed only to decrease attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure while imposing several conditions for a lasting ceasefire, including suspending US arms and intelligence support for Ukraine. However, the White House readout says Trump and Putin agreed to an energy and infrastructure ceasefire. Speaking to Fox News' Laura Ingraham after the call, Trump denied that Putin demanded an end to Western military aid for Ukraine.
We had a great call. It lasted almost 2 hours. Talked about a lot of things and toward getting it to peace. And we talked about other things also.
Was there non-negotiables mentioned by Putin? It was reported that I think the Kremlin media actually stated that he demanded an immediate cessation of aid to Ukraine in order to get to this multi-step deal.
No, he didn't. We didn't talk about aid. Actually, we didn't talk about aid at all. We talked about a lot of things, but aid was never discussed.
Although Ukraine was the focus of the call initiated by Trump, a White House statement also said the two leaders discussed improving bilateral ties, including, quote, enormous economic deals and geopolitical stability when peace has been achieved.
The call between Presidents Putin and Trump comes as European allies look to accelerate arms shipments to Ukraine ahead of a potential full ceasefire. Speaking to Bloomberg, the UK's Foreign Secretary David Lammy confirmed that he discussed the possibility with the EU's top diplomat Kaja Kallas during her trip to London yesterday. Meanwhile, European Union Commission President Ursula von der Leyen yesterday re-emphasised the need for the bloc to be able to defend itself in a future confrontation with Russia.
The era of the peace dividend is long gone. The security architecture that we relied on can no longer be taken for granted. The age of spheres of influence and power competition is well and truly back.
Von der Leyen also announced plans to set up a European military sales mechanism to help pool demand and create an EU-wide market. Earlier this month, Brussels proposed issuing €150 billion in loans to member states to boost defence spending at a national level.
Germany's parliament has approved Friedrich Merz's landmark infrastructure and defence spending package. The Chancellor-in-Waiting's plan to largely exclude defence spending from the debt brake received the two-thirds majority needed to change the country's constitution. It would also set up a €500 billion fund to invest in the country's ageing infrastructure. Merz called it the start of a united Europe defence force.
This decision that we are taking today on defence readiness in a comprehensive sense for our country can therefore be nothing less than the first major step towards a new European defence community.
Merz's historic plan was driven by US President Donald Trump's shift away from the transatlantic alliance and 2 years of economic contraction in Germany. The country's 16 states vote on the bill this Friday. If it passes, it will become law.
Now, one of Wall Street's largest banks is planning a dramatic cull of its workforce to cut costs amid recent market and economic uncertainty. Bloomberg's Tiwa Adebayo has the story.
Morgan Stanley is preparing to cut 2,000 of its workers in the coming month. It's the first major staff-related action under new CEO Ted Pick. Although trimming will take place across the firm, Bloomberg understands its roughly 15,000 financial advisors will remain exempt. Some of the changes are performance-related, whilst a small portion reflect the impact of artificial intelligence and automation, according to those familiar with the matter. Shares of Morgan Stanley are down 6% so far this year, the worst performance among major US banks. In London, Tiwa Adebayo, Bloomberg Radio.
The Bank of Japan has left its policy rate unchanged at 0.5%, while signalling unease about global trade tensions. A reference to trade policies was added to the central bank's list of risks in the outlook in a statement today. The move comes around 2 weeks before President Trump's threatened additional reciprocal tariffs are due to be announced.
Here in the UK, the government has announced plans to cut its welfare bill, aiming to save £5 billion a year by 2030, in a move that may spark a political rebellion. Labour intends to tighten the criteria disabled people and young adults need to meet to claim support. The Work and Pensions Secretary Liz Kendall promised the social security system will always be there for people who really need it.
That is a principle we will never compromise on. Yeah. But disabled people and people with health conditions who can work should have the same rights, choices and chances to work as everybody else.
Kendall's plan has been met with anger, though, from her own backbenchers, with one MP saying that they show a, quote, basic lack of humanity. 2.9 million people are out of work due to ill health in Britain, which is a third more than before the COVID pandemic.
2 astronauts whose 8-day space mission turned into 9 months have arrived back on Earth. Butch Wilmore and Sonny Williams returned in a SpaceX craft with 2 other crew members, NASA's Nick Hague and Russian cosmonaut Alexander Gorbanov. The capsule carrying the 4 landed off the coast of Florida a few hours ago. Here's NASA's Sandra Jones from SpaceX Mission Control.
Copy, splash down. We see main chutes cut. Nick, Alex, Butch, Sonny, on behalf of SpaceX, welcome home.
Wilmore and Williams' trip is the 6th longest continuous stay on the International Space Station by NASA astronauts after technical issues with their Boeing spacecraft led to their extended stay.
Those are our top stories. Let's get to the markets. The Hang Seng Tech Index retreating ahead of Tencent earnings. Bank of America says that China's equities rally may face a meaningful correction soon. US and European stock futures are up this morning, although Wall Street did sell off on Tuesday. The S&P 500 fell more than 1%. The Magnificent 7 declining 2.5%, although European stocks outperformed again. The US stocks 50 closed up by 0.7%. This morning, the Japanese yen weakening slightly after that BOJ decision to hold interest rates. The Fed's expected to hold today too. The dollar and treasuries are steady. Gold, though, has hit a record high. Fresh record high is now trading at $3,043. Oil has been retracing down about 0.5%. Those are the markets.
In a moment, we'll bring you more on what emerged from that phone call between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. Plus, has Paris peaked as a financial centre? But first, on the story that caught our eye on the terminal this morning, as someone who's not a particularly good cook,
No.
I can cook, I'm just not great at it. This is a very in-depth dive into pepper. Is pepper the unsung hero of your kitchen, Caroline?
Yeah, I love it. You know, fancy peppercorn. Bloomberg's Matthew Kronsberg has a story out in Business Week this week that apparently this is the hottest new menu trend, luxury peppercorns. And apparently chefs are even now name-checking all the various varieties, Telly Cherry, Penja, Cambodian, Kampot.
Wait, had you heard of any of these before you read this article?
Yes, I had heard of Telly Cherry, which is quite popular. I mean, there are loads of...
Do you have a shelf of special peppercorns in your house?
I don't, but I do cook.
But you would like one.
Yes, I'd like to have that much time. But yes, apparently also some of these chefs are starting to sell the peppercorns that they use on their website. So, you know, you don't just get the dishes, the plates and the cutlery, you can buy the peppercorns too.
And at a price, I mean, I noticed they range up to $18 for 4 ounces. It's about 110 grams of peppers, which seems...
About 15 quid. Whew.
Seems like quite a lot. Anyway, full story on Bloomberg.com and on the terminal.
Now, President Trump's high-profile but controversial Ukraine 30-day ceasefire proposal has been rejected by President Putin. The Russian leader has agreed to limit attacks on energy infrastructure in a call between Trump and Putin that focused on growing US-Russia bilateral relations beyond just Ukraine. Let's dig into this story. Bloomberg's Tony Halpin, who leads our team covering Russia's economy and government, is with us now. Tony, good morning. What exactly has been agreed, though, between the US and Russia? The White House and the Kremlin readouts seem to say different things.
Yes, that's right. They seem to emphasize different elements of the conversation. As you noted, the Kremlin stressed that it saw a key condition of any agreement to a longer-term full ceasefire as the refusal to supply Ukraine with any intelligence or armaments. That's something that really puts the ball back into Trump's court to go back to Ukraine and decide whether he's going to accept that in order to put further pressure on Kiev. All that Putin really agreed to was a ceasefire against energy infrastructure, and in some ways that even benefits Russia, because one of Ukraine's more effective tactics in this war has been to target all refineries in Russia in order to try and pressure the Russian economy, and presumably that will also be covered by such an agreement. So there was very little given away by Putin. He and Trump agreed to continue talking, and that seems to be the Russian tactic currently, to continue talks while ceding very little.
But it appears that Donald Trump is claiming this as a victory for him. Is there any merit in that?
Well, he doesn't have a great deal of choice, because his whole strategy seems to be based upon bringing Russia to the table and to try and negotiate a deal that ends the war in Ukraine. And in some ways, those talks sideline Ukraine and sideline Europe, and they're aimed at really striking some sort of bilateral deal and repairing the broader relationship between Russia and the US. If that doesn't work out, then the question gets asked, what is the next step for the US if they're really serious in trying to end this war? And currently, President Trump is focused on negotiations and focused on getting Russia to consider ways to halt the fighting. But Putin isn't showing much interest in doing so.
Yeah, and so skepticism then surely is the response in Europe, the UK. What about Ukraine as the fighting in Ukraine grinds on?
Yes, I mean, the UK and Europe have been looking for ways to accelerate arms shipments to Ukraine as a way to bolster Ukraine's position on the battlefield and give it a better chance during negotiations that may emerge with the US and Russia. But again, that's going to become an issue of contention now, because Putin has made very clear to Trump that if he wants this 30-day full ceasefire, those kind of shipments have to stop. And that implies that the US then will have to go back to Europeans and go back to Kiev and say, well, if we want to halt the war, we're going to have to stop the shipments. That implies that Ukraine's position will be weakened. So it's a very difficult position, both for Kiev and the US.
Okay, Tony Halpin, leading our team covering Russia's economics and government. Thank you very much.
Now to France, where rising taxes and political turmoil are having a chilling effect on the financial sector. Since last summer, international banks in Paris have quietly shelved expansion plans after years of building its role as Europe's post-Brexit financial centre. What is happening in Paris? Our finance reporter in France, Claudia Cohen, joins us now for more on this. Good morning, Claudia. What's happening in terms of head count at financial firms in Paris?
It's like some banks, some big banks like Morgan Stanley or even JP Morgan in Paris, who came with many, many people following the Brexit referendum, are quietly either cutting a bit of workforce here and there, or even the plan they had before. So for instance, in the story I'm talking about Morgan Stanley, Ted Pick beginning of last year, was saying that Paris bureau could welcome around 550 people. Now they have 450 people, and behind private doors, like management are saying, obviously with the political turmoil in the country, with the instability in regards to the taxes, maybe now it's not the good time to make all those new people coming in Paris.
What's the official line on all of this, Claudia? What is the government saying about these moves by banks, or rather lack of moves by banks that are happening?
I mean, to be fair, like they've been quite realistic about it. What they want to show more than anything is like, look how many people actually came, you know? They kind of saying like, so many people came this past few years, so obviously we can't have that many people coming every year. So they're saying that this plateau, if I can say so, situation is rather normal than worrying. And for instance, yesterday I was at Euronext conference, and the finance minister, Eric Lombard, was saying that like they kind of know that the environment is not the best business-friendly one at the moment, but they promise to make more efforts to make either the labor law like more controllable for foreign players. So like they're saying that they know that they need to keep continuing make efforts.
What does it mean for the financial professionals and their families who've moved to Paris? You've done lots of reporting on individuals.
I think the main question on that is like, what would be the alternative? Because Paris fundamentals are still there with very, very highly skilled people. The infrastructures are in my article. I talk about the schools. Like Paris were able to build many places in school for all the people who came and with the kids. So like when you talk to individuals, they tell you either like they're not moving, and for other people, it's kind of the end of a cycle, because for those who came just after the Brexit referendum, so let's say 2016, 2017, it will be kind of the end of an era at the end of this year. Because when they came, they were able to benefit from a very general fiscal regime, which basically means that almost 50% of their revenues wouldn't be taken into account for taxes. And as you know, taxes in France are quite high. And it was only an 8 years regime. So obviously, we can expect many people at the end of this year and maybe beginning of next year to ask themselves, like, should I go back to London, or maybe I can, they can try something in Milan.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.